I can still remember the sound of the necklace hitting the counter in that pawn shop. It made a small cling, but that tiny sound broke something inside me. That was the moment my mother's luck ended. Or maybe that was the moment our true story started. Before that day, I used to believe my mother's gold necklace had powers. She always said it brought her luck, that as long as it stayed around her neck, no harm would reach our family. And, to be honest, it always seemed to work. The day our landlord came to throw us out, a stranger helped us pay part of the rent. The time my mother's stall almost got burnt in the market fire, rain fell from nowhere and stopped it. She would just smile and touch the necklace. But that morning, luck did not show up. Mama had collapsed at her food stall. One minute she was serving a plate of rice to a student, and the next, she fell to the ground. I was still teaching when someone ran into my class shouting my name. I dropped my marker and ran barefoot all the way to the market. Seeing her lying there, her wrapper stained with dust, her eyes half open, it felt like the ground disappeared under me. At the hospital, the doctor said she needed surgery. The bill was more than anything I had ever seen in my life. I begged him to start treatment and promised to pay later, but he just shook his head and walked away. That night, I sat beside her bed, watching her sleep. Her breathing was slow and weak. The necklace lay softly on her chest, the gold dull under the hospital light. That necklace, the one she called her luck, was now mocking me. I thought of all the people I had called, all the messages I had sent, and how everyone kept saying they were sorry. They didn't have money. I looked at her again, my mother who had fought for me, who sold food in the rain and in the sun just so I could finish school. Then I looked at the necklace. My hand moved before my heart could stop it. I lifted it gently off her neck. It was heavier than I expected, maybe because it carried her memories, her love, her faith. I wrapped it inside my handkerchief and whispered in my heart that I was sorry. The next morning, I walked to the old pawn shop beside the bus park. My eyes were swollen from crying, and my body was shaking, but I kept going. The air smelled of diesel and dust, and I could hear the sound of buses and people shouting prices. When I entered the shop, the man behind the counter looked up. He was an old man with tired eyes and a calm face. I dropped the necklace on his counter. He picked it up slowly, and as the gold caught the light, something in his face changed. His hand trembled. Then he looked straight into my eyes and asked a question that made my heart stop beating. "Where did you get this necklace?" Question hung in the air like smoke. I felt my throat go dry. I wanted to lie, to say I bought it or found it somewhere, but my voice betrayed me. I told him it was my mother's necklace, that she had worn it all her life. He turned the necklace in his hand, his eyes fixed on it like it held the answer to something he had been searching for all his years. Then he whispered my mother's name. Nena. He said it softly, but my whole body froze. I had not told him her name. My legs began to shake. He stood up slowly, came around the counter, and sat on a stool as if his strength had left him. He asked me again, this time gently, what my mother's full name was. I said it without thinking. Nena Okoye. He closed his eyes and rubbed his forehead. When he spoke again, his voice sounded far away, like someone talking to himself. He said he knew that name, that many years ago he gave that same necklace to a woman called Nena. He said she was the only woman he ever loved, but she disappeared one night during a riot in Onitsha. He thought she had died. My ears were ringing. My heart was beating so loud I could barely hear him. I wanted to tell him to stop talking, to keep his memories to himself, but part of me wanted to know more. I asked him what he meant, and he told me how he had been a young apprentice then, working for a gold trader. He had used his savings to buy that necklace for Nena when he planned to marry her. He said the gold was pure, real gold, the kind only traders like him could find. Then he opened his drawer and brought out an old photo. It was faded and torn at the edges, but I saw it clearly. A young woman smiling shyly, wearing the same necklace. My knees weakened. It was my mother, the same face, the same eyes. The man looked at me closely. He asked how old I was, and I told him 28. He did not speak for a while. Then he said something that made the air in the room heavy. He said if what he thought was true, then I was his daughter. I stood there, staring at him, unable to breathe. My hands went cold. I felt dizzy. My mind kept saying it was not possible, that my father was dead, that Mama would have told me. But deep inside, something was breaking apart. I left the shop before he could say anything else. The necklace was still in his hand. I ran all the way to the hospital, tears blinding me, my slippers almost breaking. I didn't care who saw me. I just wanted to see my mother, to hear her voice, to know if this man's story was true. When I reached her ward, she was still sleeping, her breathing shallow, her face pale. I sat beside her and held her hand. The truth was burning inside me, and I knew I would have to wake her and ask the question that could change everything. I sat beside my mother that night, listening to the slow sound of her breathing. The hospital ward was quiet, except for the faint beeping of the machine beside her bed. My chest was tight. I kept replaying everything the old man said, the way he looked at the necklace, the photo of her wearing it. My heart refused to rest. After a long while, her eyes opened. She looked weak, but when she saw me, she tried to smile. I held her hand tighter. I didn't know how to start, so I just said it. I told her I had taken the necklace to the pawn shop to sell it for her hospital bills. She closed her eyes, and I saw a tear roll down her face. I told her about the old man, about what he said, how he claimed he knew her, and that she was once the woman he loved. Her hand stiffened in mine. At first, she said nothing. Then she whispered that some things are better buried, that some memories only bring pain. But I begged her not to hide anything from me. I needed to know who the man was and why he had my mother's old picture. She turned her face to the wall and stayed quiet for a long time. I thought she had slept off, but then she began to talk in a voice so soft I had to lean close to hear. She said a long time ago, before she met the man I grew up calling my father, she lived in Onitsha with her uncle. She worked as a teacher in a small primary school. That was where she met a young man who sold gold. His name was Bello. She said he was kind, that he made her laugh, that he used to say one day he would give her something pure to show his love. When he finally brought the necklace, she almost cried. They planned to marry the next year. But before that could happen, a riot broke out in the city. There was fire and shouting everywhere. She ran to her uncle's village that night and never saw Bello again. When she went back after the chaos ended, his shop was gone. People told her he had died. A few months later, she found out she was pregnant. Her uncle wanted her to hide it, but she refused. Then she met my stepfather, who took her in and raised me like his own. She said she never told me the truth because she wanted me to have peace, not confusion. I couldn't stop crying. Everything the man said was true. The necklace wasn't just a lucky charm. It was proof of a love that never died, proof that my real father was still alive. I told her Mr. Bello was not dead, that he was alive, and the one who owned the pawn shop. She gasped and tried to sit up, but her body was too weak. I saw fear, shock, and something else in her eyes. Hope. I held her hand and promised to bring him to her, but as I stood to leave, the monitor beside her started beeping faster. Nurses rushed in. I was pushed aside as they worked on her. I watched helplessly, my whole world spinning again. I didn't know if she would make it through the night. I did not sleep that night. I sat outside the hospital gate, my eyes swollen and my heart heavy. The nurses said my mother was stable but weak. I could not stop thinking about what she told me, how everything I thought I knew about my life had changed in one night. My hands were still shaking as I watched the streetlights flicker over the empty road. The necklace was still at Mr. Bello's shop. Before sunrise, I made up my mind. I had to go back to him. The man deserved to know she was alive, and I needed help to save her. I didn't care what happened afterward. If he was truly my father, then he had to see her one more time. The morning air was cold when I reached the bus park. The town was just waking up. Traders arranging goods, buses honking, people rushing to work. I walked fast until I saw the faded signboard that said Bello Gold Exchange. The shop was still closed. I waited outside, pacing up and down, until I saw him coming from the corner with a bunch of keys in his hand. He looked surprised to see me. I told him my mother was in the hospital and that she had confirmed everything. He stood still, his eyes wide, his mouth slightly open. For a moment, he did not move. Then he whispered that he needed to see her. We took a bike to the hospital. The ride felt like forever. I kept watching his face as the wind blew through his gray hair. He looked lost in thought, like a man walking into a dream. When we reached, I led him through the corridor. Nurses looked at us curiously, but I didn't care. When we got to the ward, I stopped at the door and watched as he walked in slowly. Mama was awake, her eyes dull but alert. The moment she saw him, she froze. He stopped too, and for a second, it was like time stood still. They just looked at each other. No words, no movement. Tears began to run down her face. He went close and held her hand. I saw his shoulders shaking. She tried to speak, but he placed his other hand gently on her cheek. They sat like that for a long time. Two people who had waited 30 years to see each other again. I stayed by the door, watching quietly, feeling like a visitor in my own life. My chest felt tight, but at the same time, something inside me was settling, like a missing piece was finally falling into place. After a while, he turned to me and asked about the bills. I told him how much was left and how the hospital refused to start treatment without full payment. He nodded once and said I should not worry. Then he went outside and made a call. By afternoon, everything was paid. The surgery was booked for the next day. When I thanked him, he only smiled and said family does not thank family. I didn't know what to say. All I could do was sit beside my mother's bed and hold her hand, while the man who had once been her past now stood quietly by the window, watching over both of us. That night, for the first time in weeks, I felt something I had almost forgotten: peace. But deep down, I also felt fear, because I knew life would never be the same again. The morning of the surgery was silent. I sat outside the operating room, my knees pressed together, my fingers clutching the hem of my wrapper. The white walls made everything feel cold. Mr. Bello was standing a few steps away, his head bowed, whispering prayers under his breath. I had not seen a man that old look so broken and so alive at the same time. It felt like the whole world was holding its breath. I kept hearing the sound of the clock ticking on the wall, every second dragging like an hour. My heart was beating so fast I thought I would faint. I tried to imagine what Mama was thinking inside, whether she knew he was here, whether she believed he had forgiven her for leaving. After what felt like forever, the door opened and the doctor came out. He said the surgery went well, but she needed rest. Relief rushed through my body like water. I covered my face and cried quietly. Mr. Bello put a hand on my shoulder and told me everything would be fine now. His voice was calm, but I could hear it shaking a little. 2 days later, Mama woke up properly. When I entered the room, she was sitting up, weak but smiling. Mr. Bello was sitting beside her bed, peeling an orange. They looked at each other like people who had found something they thought was lost forever. I stood by the window, watching them talk in low voices. It was strange seeing them together, yet it felt right, like that was how life was meant to be before the world scattered everything. Later that evening, the doctor said she could go home in a few days. Mr. Bello told me he would handle everything, that Mama and I should move to a better place where she could recover well. He wanted to make up for lost years, not just with words, but with care. I did not argue. I only nodded because I knew he meant it from his heart. On the day of discharge, the sun was bright and warm. As we stepped out of the hospital gate, Mr. Bello brought out a small red box from his pocket. He opened it and took out the gold necklace, the same one that had started all of this. He turned to Mama and said she should wear it again, that it was never meant to be sold or lost. His hands were shaking slightly as he fastened it around her neck. She smiled, touched it gently, and looked up at him with tears in her eyes. Then she turned to me and said softly that she told me the necklace brought luck, but now she knew it brought love. I could not speak. I just hugged her, and she held both of us close, like she was afraid to ever let go again. That night, as we sat together eating dinner, I looked at them and realized the truth. The necklace was not magic. It was a bridge between the past and the present, between pain and healing, between loss and love. It had brought us back to each other. From that day, Mama never took it off again. And whenever the sun caught the gold and it shone bright against her skin, I always remembered the sound it made that first day in the pawn shop, the sound that ended our luck and started our miracle.